Safeguard Our Flank, Chapter 6, Part 10, The Northern Sector. The first action the 46th North Midland Division was engaged in was at the Battle of Lucheux, when they attacked the Hohenzollern redoubt. This was another of the strongly held fortified villages along the front. The 46th had been the first territorial division to land in France, and it was from the Lancashire Fusiliers that they were instructed in the art of trench warfare. On the 1st of June 1914, Major General Wortley, 1857 to 1934, became commander of the British 46th North Midland Division. The division was part of General Allenby's Third Army. On the 20th of April 1916, the division was withdrawn from Vimy and ordered south. By May, they were recuperating after the battle's horrors. The 46th Division was billeted at Fonquevillers and commanded by Major General the Honourable E.J. Montague Stuart Wortley. They were attached to Lieutenant General D'Oyley Snow's 7th Corps. His corps was part of the Third Army, whose general officer commanding was General Allenby. The division incorporated the North Midland Division and were to attack the north side of the fortified village of Gommecourt, on the left flank of the British line. The division was made up of 3 brigades: the 137th, led by Brigadier General Williams, which included the North and South Staffordshires; the 139th Brigade, commanded by Brigadier General Shipley, included the 1st, 5th, 6th and 7th and 8th Battalions Sherwood Foresters, and in support were the 138th Brigades, 1st, 4th and 5th Lincolnshires, led by Brigadier General G.C. Kemp. Last but not least, the 1st Monmouthshire Pioneers attended to all their field engineering works. As the division began to gather together, they were ordered to practice their bayoneting skills, whilst acting in a variety of servicing and communication skills, building pipelines, laying track, building roads, trenches and gun pits. This was preparing for the big push. They were now attached to General Rawlinson's Fourth Army. Their task was to help liberate the Gommecourt salient by linking up with the 56th coming towards them from the other side of Gommecourt Park. While the Staffordshires and the Sherwoods had been practising for the attack on the 1st of July, the Lincoln and the Leicestershire battalions were occupying the British front line before Gommecourt Park and Wood. There, on the 4th of June, they patrolled at night and improved the trench conditions, which were suffering under the continuous downpours of rain. Whilst they were there, they were told they were to be attached to the 46th Division, and it was during the practices simulating the attack on Gommecourt that the battalion commanders came to the conclusion that they couldn't manage all that they were being asked. They appealed to General Snow, who agreed to loan them the Lincoln and Leicestershire battalions, who were to provide 3 companies from each to line up behind the Staffords and Sherwood Foresters, bearing extra stores and ammunition. The 4th companies, 400 men, were to dig a communication trench stretching from the British front line to the German, across no man's land, to aid supply and keep safe from shelling, men acting as reserves. On the 24th of June, the British artillery started to zero in on the German gun parks to the rear of Gommecourt, hidden in Pigeon, Beards Square and Rossignol Wood. These shots were meant to register the guns onto the targets. Unfortunately, it requires accurate bracketing shots to be sure that when the time comes, those targets would be hit. The gun barrels and any rifling had to be new. The shells had to fit accurately and have exactly the same amount of propellant. The gun trails had to be properly secured, and the ground under the wheels needed to be firm. The observation sections, whose job it was to register the fall of shot, were responsible for maps, flash spotting, and sound ranging. Considering all these factors, you wouldn't be surprised to rely upon taking out the opposing guns. Unfortunately, that is exactly what General Warrington did. It was only the previous October that counter-battery work was to be left to the heavy artillery, and a special officer with the necessary assistance attached to each group commander, and by the July 1916 the system was still in its infancy. Surveyors were organised into field survey companies, Royal Engineers, one per army. Each army had an observation section for flash spotting and a sound ranging section. At the Battle of the Somme, information was passed via telephone exchanges. These, however, were frequently destroyed. On the night of the 27th of June, the area suffered 48 hours of continual rain. The Staffords and Sherwoods filed into the forward trench early the next morning, where they tramped knee-deep in mud and slime. The battlefield before them was a quagmire, with shell holes filled with water. It was a most depressing sight. It was obvious that the attack would flounder, especially as the men had to carry such a vast amount of extra material. At the last minute, the attack was put back 48 hours to the 1st of July. Now the men in the front-line trenches had to be withdrawn to allow them to dry out and rest. For the Sherwoods and Staffords, they had to return to Lucheux to demonstrate before General Snow a practice run before they returned to perform the actual run. At 6:24 on the 1st of July, the final shells were sent over using high explosive and smoke. Trench mortars provided more accurate distribution of smoke bombs. Few doubted the Germans had been destroyed. The bombardment had been a moral boost. At 7:27, the Sherwood foresters discharged the final rounds of smoke into no man's land. At 7:30, the Staffordshires and the Sherwood foresters climbed out of their new forward trench, using ladders or steps cut into the trench sides, their sergeants helping to pull the men out under the watchful eyes of the captain and his lieutenants, who would themselves fall in behind their own companies, with the company runner and engineer signaller next to the captain. All the A companies of each battalion would line up on their parapet, dressing 5 yards between each man. They would advance side by side until they had reached 100 yards. The first 3 waves would total 600 to 700 men. The day was bright and clear. They moved off at a steady pace, with their rifles at the port, bayonet in the air. Behind them, further waves lined up and followed them. There was no shouting or light banter. They were all far too nervous, wondering what was going to happen. The sergeants, as much to bolster their own courage, told them to keep in line and not bunch up. But the ground was pitted with holes, half full of water. There was no way they could keep a straight line. The Sherwoods passed over the German front line and disappeared into the wood beyond. When the time came round, the B companies would climb out and do exactly the self-same thing, each company, battalion and supporting battalion following one behind the other, keeping to a steady 2 miles per hour, so that the artillery bombardment put on to keep the German heads down would be 100 yards in front of the first wave. Each man would be carrying his battle order kit, spare pair of socks, extra ammunition, and later waves would bring forward duckboards to span the German trenches, ladders to reach down to the bottom, spare ammunition and grenades and digging tools. So far, everything was going well, and according to plan. The first 2 waves got across, and there was no reply by the enemy. They were soon lost to sight. Suddenly one felt the wind freshen. It sent a shiver down the spine as the smoke swirled about, and then began to clear. Now the whole panorama presented itself to the German observers. The attack by the 46th went as follows. The 7th Sherwood Foresters, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Hind, was sent to capture the German trenches, Food and Fork, to their front, leaving later waves to clear up and reverse the firing step. They were to push on past the Schwaben Nest to the Quadrilateral, there to link up with the 9th London Rifles, the Queen Victorias. The 6th Sherwood Foresters were split into 2. 2 companies were to back up the advancing 1/5th and 2nd companies of the 1/7th Sherwood Foresters, who were to clear and consolidate the captured trenches. The 5th Sherwood Foresters, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Wilson, was to advance and take the German front line, making their way through Gommecourt Wood and head for the Quadrilateral to give support to the 7th. The 8th Sherwood Foresters were to act as a reserve formation, bringing supplies up to the front, looking after the spare ammunition and grenades whilst collecting up the wounded. The 5th North Staffordshires, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Burnett, to form extra waves following behind the 6th North Staffords, to clear the German trenches and bear supplies into Gommecourt village and park. The 6th North Staffordshires, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Boot, was to take the German front line and move quickly into the village to support the 6th South Staffords in taking the Keep, a strongly fortified position, and meet up with the London Rifles coming from the south. The 5th South Staffordshires, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Raymer, to form extra waves following behind the 6th South Staffords, to clear German trenches and bear supplies into Gommecourt village and park. The 6th South Staffordshires, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Thursfield, to split, one half meeting up with the 4th London Rifles and the other half taking the German Fist Trench guarding the park, bypassing the Kaiser Oak to attack the Germans in the rear in their front line trench Fit and Fig. The 4th Lincoln's Regiment, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Barrell, 3 companies were to form an extra wave behind the 2 6th companies of the Sherwood Foresters. They were to act as carriers to supply spare ammunition and grenades, and to tidy up and clear the German trenches. D Company was to dig a communication trench across no man's land to ease the supply chain. The 1st 5th Lincoln's Regiment, commanded by Colonel Sandal, 3 companies were to form an extra wave behind the 2 companies of the 6th Sherwood Foresters. They were to act as carriers to supply spare ammunition and grenades, and to tidy up and clear the German trenches, and the 4th Company were to dig a communication trench across no man's land to make safe the supply chain